Welcome to the Crossley Center and the Corbell School program today, the U.S. Japan Alliance and Defense Policy. I'm Floyd Ciruli, the director of the Crossley Center and your moderator today. This is the fourth program in this series on our relationship with Japan and the Indo-Pacific region. We have three foreign policy experts today who will discuss the challenges presented in this rapidly changing environment. As you all know, the president on March the 12th convened the Quad, that is to say his counterparts in Australia and Japan and India, really for the first time at the ministerial or the presidential level and the prime minister level. Then Tony Blinken, our Secretary of State, with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, went down to Japan, met with their counterparts. And if you look at their statements, it's quite clear they're strengthening the alliance, but also very concerned about China. Then Blinken went to, with our national security advisor, went to Anchorage, Alaska, and had an interaction with his Chinese counterparts, which was labeled frothy, intense, and rocky. So it got off to a good start, and then he shortly left for the NATO, a NATO conference in which he said mostly the same things, and that is that NATO must be aware and be conscious of China and the Indo-Pacific and what's happening in Asia. And not just we're not just talking defense policy, but just policy in general, including human relations and cyber security, and just a whole host of broad issues. So what a great moment to have this conversation. We are fortunate to have partners that helped us construct this program. The Consulate-General of Japan, Midori Takeuchi, has been with us and a very strong partner, including her staff. For example, somebody that works very hard on the program is Miko Isizaka, who has been very helpful, because we've been doing this now for 2 years. We had 4 programs last year. As a matter, one of our guests was with us last year, and we had, including one just on analyzing the election from the Japanese point of view, and I thought that was very interesting for our audience. And then we've had 4 programs this year, and this one is on defense. Let me now introduce our panel. First, we have Tsuneo Watanabe, who goes by Nabe for the most part to his friends and his colleagues, and which is great for me. He is I was with him 2 years ago at his office in Tokyo, and I think it was my first conversation in Tokyo, and he got me off to a great start because he just knows a lot about the foreign policy environment and also Japanese politics. He is a senior fellow with the Sakata Peace Foundation. He came from, prior to that, he was with the Tokyo Foundation. The Sakata is an independent policy research organization. He spent, I believe, Nabe 10 years with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., which many people know as CSIS. Quite famous in the foreign policy field, and he got his degree from Tohoku University in Japan. I don't know, is that that's not in Tokyo?
It's in Sendai. It's close to the Arctic trouble.
Got you. Dina Smeltz and I have been doing things together for many years and going to national conferences, presenting papers on foreign policy. I made a reference to somebody in the panel being with us last year. She came in and shared her polling with us. She has been doing survey research now for more than 2 decades. And she's been at the Chicago Council for Global Affairs as a senior fellow for quite a while. I consider the Chicago Council the sort of the go-to organization for American and some foreign public opinion analysis and original research. So it's we consider it very high quality, and I often quote it. As a matter of fact, I quoted it in one of our previous panels. She also has collaborations with Russia, Mexico, Canada, Australia, Eastern Asian research organizations, and so consequently, the council conducts independent polls with them. And she said she would share a recent Russian survey, and it's with one of their Levada, one of their independent organizations, which we were discussing. Is so wonderful to see that there's somebody that can still do independent surveys in the Soviet Union. They have a lot of surveys, but some of the others you worry about, if not the methodology, at least the questioning. And I feel very confident about Levada. And Lewis Griffith from the Corbell School, he got his degree there. He teaches foreign policy and security questions. He interestingly, he spent 8 years as soon as he got his degree with the faculty of the Air Command of the Staff College it's in Alabama. We were just talking about it. He was the course director of the strategy of wealth on warfare. He also was the department chair of the Joint Warfare Fighting Department, and he also led. I am reading from a old version of this, from the new one, the War on Terror Research Seminar. So I think we've got somebody who, to the extent that we're talking defense policy, particularly about what the military thinks about strategy out there, we've got somebody who can be very good, and I appreciate Lewis being with us. The format today is we will start with Mr. Watanabe, then Dina Smeltz, and then Lewis Griffith. We will then have some dialogue after their presentations, and then take your questions. Please use your chat icon down at the bottom of the screen to record your questions, and we will sort of weave them into our conversation as we go along. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to Dr. Watanabe. He has a few slides, and he can bring those up when he wants to.
Thank you very much for kind introduction. By the way, I'd like to introduce my organization, Sasakawa Peace Foundation, a little bit, because before the State Secretary Tony Blinken visited Japan, State Department released a fact sheet you can find in the website of the State Department, and they pointed out the closer cooperation between U.S. and the Japanese government, but also people-to-people exchange was very tight, and several non-governmental institutions contributed, and luckily and very proudly, Sasakawa Peace Foundation was listed as a non-governmental organization who contributed the exchange between the United States and Japan, as well as other U.S. institutions such as Mike Mansfield Foundation or U.S. Japan Council. So I'm very glad to to.
Well, I considered it, Nabe, one of my best conversations with you, and as I mentioned, it was the first one, so it really sort of framed many others. So thank you very much for what you and your organization does.
Actually, I appreciate it. Especially, you know, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation has a U.S. body in Washington, D.C., Sasakawa, USA, and once headed by the Dennis Blair, former Defense of National Director of National Intelligence of the President Obama, and also Jim Zumwalt, former Deputy Chief of Mission in the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, and also he experienced several very important State Department the positions. So I appreciate the U.S. friends working in Sasakawa Peace Foundation too. But also, let me go to today's topic: Japan's defense policy after the U.S.-Japan 2+2. Of course, not only U.S.-Japan 2+2, there are many interesting things happening to the U.S. diplomacy and the defense security policy in Asia. I would say Indo-Pacific. Of course, the 2+2 in Japan was a very impressive. What is Japan 2+2 in March 16? That is that's very important. Probably not many Japanese realize, not many American realize. However, I think that pushed Japan to the frontline state facing China. In a sense, Japan's role is regarded as a West Germany. It's not Germany in the Cold War era. West Germany was a front nation of NATO against WTO, not World Trade Organization, the Warsaw Treaty Organization. Japan is kind of death now, but probably people are not realizing, but gradually people are realizing now Japan is a frontline nation. Joint statement was very, very strong. U.S. Japan acknowledged that China's behavior were inconsistent with existing international order, present political economy, the military, and technological challenge to the alliance and the international community. That's kind of a common part with even other countries. But the very strong one is that ministers also expressed the serious concerns about recent disruptive developments in the region, such as the China Coast Guard law. And further, they discussed the United States' unwavering commitment to the defense of Japan under Article 5 of our security treaty, which includes the Senkaku Islands. That's kind of a guaranteed U.S. defense for the Japan's territorial defense. But that's clearly somehow the declaration of the U.S.-Japan much closer cooperation to the China's challenge. That's called, salami slicing, incremental challenge to the other countries' sovereignty and the international law. Joint statement also, several very critical ones, like the U.S.-Japan opposed to unilateral action seeks to change the status quo, including Taiwan Strait. That was very, very historically. I'm sure China was shocked, and somehow the Japan never. It's not never, but never such a strong one. Sometimes U.S. Japan talked about Taiwan Strait, but of course that's both sides are always considering. That's very important and the critical point. But in the official statement, that's very strong. So the ministers confirmed the necessary immediate resolution of abductee issue too. That's abductee issues are the abductees from North Korea. And the trilateral cooperation among U.S., Japan, ROK is critical. Very important, but that's one thing that's very difficult for proceed because as you may realize, Japan and South Korea very difficult situation, unfortunately, politically and emotionally. But that's clear message for the Biden administration, asking Japan and South Korea. So I'm watching a very important the trilateral the cooperation on security issue, 3 countries, not only for the dealing with North Korea, but also to deal with China. But so what U.S. ROK said in the 2+2, that's very important. U.S. ROK 2+2, 2 days after U.S. Japan ROK, U.S. Japan 2+2. China was not in a joint statement. By the way, that's not only U.S. ROK, but U.S. India or Quad. They try to avoid China. So the ministers and the secretaries emphasis on North Korean nuclear and the ballistic missile issue are priority for the alliance. That means that their priority is not China. That's kind of safe because South Korea is always afraid of China's retaliation, especially in the economic area. South Korea had a very difficult time when they deployed the U.S. missile defense system in South Korean territory. At that time, China did many possible retaliation, like the stop the inflow of the travelers to South Korea, and also several measures to the for the business trading between South Korea and China. And China's the attitude to the neighbors is a very clear. Foreign Ministry spokesman, now very famous person, Zhao Lijian's regular press conference, March 17th. Japan, driven by the selfish aim to check China's revitalization, willingly stoops to acting as strategic vassal of the United States. That's very strong word and kind of shocking to Japanese. But China's acting like this, and many neighboring countries are so afraid of some assertive wording against China. So Japan was very brave, and South Korea was cautious, and even Australia and India are cautious. So why Japan is a frontline nation? I think China always be challenging to the Japan's territory. Oh, this is a person. His wording is sometimes very honest and relatively easier to understand what China wants. Japan as a frontline state, the United States is now, especially the DoD and the military, try to strengthen the counter A2AD capability along the First Island chain. So First Island chain is from Japanese archipelago, Okinawa Islands to Taiwan to the Philippines. So that is a kind of the line to protect the Pacific from China's free access to. That's the nightmare for the United States. If China is freely moving Pacific Ocean with submarines and several naval one, that's quickly access to the U.S. mainland. And now U.S. is trying to establish a Pacific Deterrence Initiative, PDI. That was a famous testimony of Admiral Davidson in the Pacific Command. So he said, greatest danger we face in the Indo-Pacific region is erosion of conventional deterrence vis-a-vis China. So, that's clearly Japan hosted the U.S. military in several U.S. military one. That's very same as West Germany in the Cold War era. And the focus area are trying the PDF challenges that require immediately joint solutions, not to account it for through the service investment. I don't read it, this, but that's a U.S. Naval Institute news. That's interpretation of what the Admiral Davidson said. But clearly, the front line is a first island chain and the second island chain, and that China is a try to influence over, and that's clearly the very similar to the front line of West Germany in the Cold War era. So Japan is serious. Why? Because Japan is determined to, China is determined to challenge Japan's territory, especially Senkaku Islands, by the China's paramilitary vessels with assertive China Coast Guard law. That's very recently enacted. That's domestic law. For Japan, very critical, the seamless defense in the territorial water surrounding Senkaku is the more critical. And U.S. Japan alliance would be tested in the case of a contingency. That's kind of a Senkaku paradox. That's the Michael Hanlon of Brookings wrote a very interesting book, Senkaku Paradox. That's a subtitle clearly. It says the dilemma for the U.S. Risking a great power war over small stake. So especially the old days, not the old days, even 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years ago, I think Japan's effort to defend Senkaku Islands was a little bit lonely, because not many people realize that China's the expansive attitude was not only to Japan, but all over the world, or all neighbors. But 10 years ago, it was only Japan's effort, and fortunately, the Obama administration was a very understanding early stage of China's assertive action. So the Kurt Campbell, now the Indo-Pacific coordinator of Biden, at that time Assistant Secretary of State East Asia and the Pacific, initiated with State Secretary Hillary Clinton pivot. Later, they changed the wording as rebalance to Asia. So at that time, Hillary Clinton and the President Obama also determined to the Senkaku is a target of a U.S.-Japan alliance, Article 5. So that's this Biden administration continued to have it. But think now, a little bit different. U.S. is facing more seriously with China, but still the Senkaku paradox exists somehow, because the Senkaku is a small island and nobody living in. If some military crash over Senkaku, I think Japan leading it to defend Japan's own defense, and before Article 5 is targeting, because Article 5 is a more serious war against China with Japan and the United States. That's very risky. So Japan should avoid such a case. So Japan needs to develop the seamless defense from Japan Coast Guard to Japan Maritime Defense Forces with a smooth transition and political decision making. But that's still troublesome. 10 years ago, I belonged to another think tank, Tokyo Foundation, and I made a recommendation, several things. Like Japan's Coast Guard is pretty much concentrating on law enforcement capability. So even they don't have the mission to defend the territorial defense. Now Chinese Coast Guard is pretty much the paramilitary characteristic. Now they're under the Chinese Communist Party's armed service, the commission, a military commission. So they could be easily changed to the military characteristic. But on the other hand, Japan's Coast Guard is very much a law enforcement, a capability and the legal status. Smooth transition, the Japan's defense, maritime defense forces, that's very tough. And but we need to think about it. Some legal change and the practice change. That's big challenge is ongoing. And also, I think, frontline nation in the new competition with China. I think missile capability and air defense capabilities are serious. So Japan has a very limited the missile defense system, and also Japan don't have any kind of strikes back capability to North Korea or China. Now, China's mid-range cruise and ballistic missile capability, such as BF-21 and BF-26, has a no counter capability, even not only Japan but US too, thanks to the IMF treaty. So now IMF treaty is gone. By the way, the IMF treaty is only signed by the Russia and the United States. China never be in there. So now US is trying to deploy some mid-range missile in Japan. That's somehow one thing, but that's politically sensitive. And also, Japan's missile defense, especially the existing plan to the deploying easy/sure deployment, was somehow the political controversy. And Japan still seeking what kind of alternative. That's very difficult things, but need to decide. And also the aborted political discussion that Japan really discussed about Japan need Japan's own strikes back capability because it strengthens deterrence also. Or deployment of a US cruise missile in Japan. Both is seriously discussed. I think the Kitaoka and Mori, that Kitaoka is the professor at Emeritus of Tokyo University, and Professor Mori Satoshi is a professor of Hosei, argues that Japan should introduce Tomahawk cruise missiles or gradually upgraded mid-range ballistic missiles or even hypersonic missiles step by step to counter expanding Chinese missile and air power capability in Japan's limited defense budget. In the Chuo Colon Journal in the April issue. That's big argument because the LDP, ruling party, tried to change that basic idea, but that idea was not possible because somehow the very cautious and reluctant coalition partner Komeito and also Japan's business are not so seriously considering a more strong military capability. But it's a turning point. I worked with Professor Kitaoka and Professor Mori closely. We did several policy proposals in the past 15 years. And what I joined Kitaoka's proposal was realized already, like a change of interpretation of the right of collective defense or change of Japan's policy is ban on military equipment exports. So that's now the Japan's serious discussion. And political hurdle is still high. Coalition partner Komeito is reluctant. And some LDP members, such as Secretary General of LDP and Japanese business are reluctant. By the way, now the Washington is pretty much interested in what kind of pro-China people was the influential in the Japanese politics. I just discussed with this matter with the U.S. Embassy's staff, I think 2 or 3 days. So that's also issue. But that's on the two things ongoing. Japan is trying to expand their own defense, but also counter argument was we have a closer business relation with China. We should be careful. So U.S.-Japan cooperation cross domains also, especially space and cyber. U.S. plan to launch a low-orbit satellite constellation system at altitude between 300 kilo and 1,000 kilo. So Japan plan to join the project, so-called constellation system, by collaborating the sensor deployment and miniaturization and satellites, because that's very helping to detect and the intercept the missile, potentially from China, not only China, but Russia and North Korea. So Japan already budgeted for the fiscal year for the research and development. So relatively lower hurdle. Oh, I skipped the Quad things, but Quad also talking about the very important discussion, because Quad is helping, because Japan is maybe front line nation, but Japan would like to avoid too much pressure from China. So cooperation with US is of course, but also cooperation with Australia and India. That's very important, free and open Pacific. Realism, Japan is trying to maintain and upgrade the US-Japan alliance. Liberalism is to maintain the current regional order and networking, like a minded partner, Australia, India, ASEAN, hopefully South Korea, Canada, European powers. Europeans are more interested in recently. So I think that's very important things. So thank you very much. I stopped here.
Thank you, Nabe. And Dina, why don't you bring up your slides and we'll start with public opinion here.
Well, that was a terrific setup for public opinion in the United States and Japan on the alliance and on attitudes towards China. This looks like a 2+3, not a 2+2, but the 2+2 meeting background was terrific. Of course, a key goal of the Biden administration is to reassure allies, not just in the Pacific, but in Europe as well, of the US commitment after 4 years of unpredictability with Trump, and to build a consensus on how to approach China. And then the high-level visits that Nabe just reviewed was a very visible signal of trying to achieve this objective. And also, Prime Minister Suga is likely to visit the White House soon as the first foreign leader to meet with Biden. So that is another signal that similar to what you were saying, Nabe, that Japan is really an important country in the alliance right now, given what's going on with China. Let's see. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background because I'm going to throw a lot of figures, and it's usually easy to have some kind of a roadmap. So we at the council mostly focus on American opinion. We have data going back to 1978. In the case of what I'm presenting today, the council has been conducting surveys specifically on foreign policy since the end of the Vietnam War, so we can watch trends and shifts during different eras. I'm also I tried to pull in some Japanese public opinion too, where I could find it. So there's some Pew surveys and Genran and PO surveys that were conducted in Japan. And looking at, just going to review opinion toward U.S. Japan relations, attitudes of Americans toward what their preferences are for U.S. policy in Asia, and then views of China from both sides, and then views of U.S. Japan relations in light of some difficult circumstances surrounding tensions between Beijing and Washington. So American opinion of Japan over the past 40-something years should also add further reassurance that Japan is an important country to Americans. This is a question called a thermometer scale. It's been asked since the 60s, this type of a question, but you ask people from 0 to 100, where 0 means it's a very cool, frosty feeling, and 100 is a very warm, positive feeling, where they place countries on this scale. Opinion of Japan has just been consistently increasing since the 90s. The last two measures, 65, when Americans gave a mean of 65 degrees to Japan, is actually the highest we have ever registered in our surveys. And 81% also say that Japan is more of a partner than a rival. That was in 2020, and that was also a very high point. On the other hand, in Japan, from the Japanese perspective, American opinion of the United States is actually at one of its lowest point. It is at its lowest point ever. This is Pew surveys. The dark line is opinion of the United States, favorable view of the United States. So it fell from 68% to 41% in 2020. Before that, though, even during the Trump era, when Trump was criticizing our allies and claiming that Japan and Korea and other allies are free riding, opinion of the United States was still pretty high. It was still a majority favorable. But between 2019 and 2020, I'm guessing a lot of that has to do with the way the US handled the coronavirus. Only 15% of the Japanese think that the United States handled it well. It also could be because of some of the host nation support negotiations. And then the blue line is attitudes toward American presidents, since it goes back to George W. Bush's era. And looking at this, again, really low during the Trump administration for confidence in the US leaders, also similar to Bush years. The one interesting thing is if you notice, there's a lag of about 2 years between negative views of a president and then the opinion of the United States falling, but it never really fell as low as 41 percentage points favorable before. But what this graph, it gives me some optimism, because it shows that after the Bush years, even though opinion was low, there was a rebound once Obama came into power. And then it's really interesting, I was just reading some articles about how the LDP leadership usually trusts Republican presidents more than Democratic presidents for a number of factors, but partially because they took the threat of China more seriously, where Obama and Clinton were seen maybe to be less strong toward China and more accommodating. But in terms of Japanese public opinion, it seems like the other way around, at least for the last 3 presidents. Okay, so we haven't had any, I haven't seen any polls in past 2020 for Japan, but in this poll shows you that even though opinion of the United States had definitely dropped in the past year from 2019 to 2020, Japanese people still see the United States by far as the most important country for Japan. 66% say the United States is the most important. China was the closest, but that was just 9%. And then on the left side is how Americans view. The question was asked differently. We gave each country and said, do you think it's very important, somewhat important, not very important, not important at all? Japan gets the highest in terms of importance for these countries, 78% total important. China got 75. And then it's interesting that Nabe made the comparison to West Germany, and being a frontline state, Germany came third with 72%. So again, extremely important to both countries. There's a mutual sense of importance. And of course, I wanted to mention too that it's not just overall importance. We also asked about whether Japan is important to the US economy and to US security. In 2018, 91% said that Japan is important to the US economy. 79% said the relationship with Japan is important for US security. In 2019, 78% said the US relationship with Japan strengthens US national security. So on many levels, Americans really appreciate having Japan as an ally. And American support for alliances in general has either maintained majority support or even increased over the Trump years. In 2020, 59% of Americans said that US alliances in East Asia benefited not only the partner countries, but also the United States. And of course, part of the alliance agreement is the hosting of US bases. The dark blue line is the overall opinion. It's now at 59%. That say that the United States should have long-term bases in Japan. It's down from 2018, not exactly sure why. We'll have to dig a little bit more into that. We just got these data back. But one guess or one possibility is that under President Trump, when there was a constant refrain of allies not pulling their weight and that insistence on them paying more for our support and our security guarantee. Now that there is a different kind of internationalist president, perhaps Americans don't feel that they need to insert that correction in public opinion, but we'll have to see what that is. It could also be that the problem of COVID and domestic extremism and racism in the United States, which have really become more prominent in terms of threats that Americans see, they might be affecting views on foreign policy in a different way. So stay tuned for this because we're analyzing it more closely. But the big point is majorities have consistently said that the United States should have military bases in Japan and Korea as well. Okay. And then probably the most credible measure of public support for our allies is when Americans support using U.S. troops to defend them in particular situations. So the two long-term questions we've asked are, the light blue line is if North Korea invaded South Korea. In the March 2021 survey, 53% of Americans said that they would favor sending U.S. troops in this instance. In 2017, that had reached a high point of 64%. That is because in that year, 75% considered North Korea a critical threat to the United States. It's when there was a lot of missile testing and angry words. I think that might have been the Rocket Man clash with Kim Jong-un. And then since then, Americans are have expressed less concern about North Korea. And so the number has gone down. Usually when there is a higher threat, that's when Americans will support military action. At the same time though, 53% is still much higher than anything building up to 2015. So, this is something really interesting for me, is that there is a constant refrain that Americans are tired of endless wars, and they are really tired. They don't think that the war in Iraq or Afghanistan was worth the cost. At the same time, though, we have seen willingness to take military action actually increase a bit over time, and especially when there's a direct threat for something like to address or to use airstrikes against a terrorist camp in Iraq or Syria that's an ISIS type of organization. A large majority of Americans support that too. So when there is a direct threat, they do support the use of force. Then in 2018, I believe, we asked about if China it's the gray line. It looks a lot like the dark black line. The gray line is if North Korea attacks Japan. There were only 2 times we asked that question. Once in 2015, when 48% agreed that we should use US forces, and that jumped again in 2018 to 64%, another period of time where North Korea was seen as a very critical threat. The red line is exactly what Nabe was talking about with our Article 5 treaty. If China initiates a military conflict with Japan over disputed islands, it's a minority, 44%, but it's increasing over time. And what we've seen is whenever China is involved in one of these scenarios, usually Americans are pretty reluctant, also with Russia, because they're formidable military forces, and it would be not an easy conflict to get involved in. And then finally, the long black line is Taiwan. If China invaded Taiwan, again, a minority, 40% support it, but you can see how over time that has been increasing. And all of these are hypothetical scenarios. So in a real world situation, if these became a live conflict, there'll be messaging and people trying to influence public opinion in either direction. So this is just, baseline support, which I think is pretty substantial, given that a lot of Americans don't know that much about some of these issues. Just wanted to check. Okay. Next, we asked about U.S. foreign policy in Asia. Do you think the United States should put a higher priority on building up our strong relations with traditional allies, even if it might diminish our relations with China, or build a new partnership with China, even if it might diminish our relations with traditional allies? So you can see in 2012, attitudes were pretty close. 53% said traditional allies versus 40% build up relations with China. But since then, and especially in the last couple of years, the clear emphasis is on reinforcing our relations with traditional allies. In addition to this, 59% of Americans say the US should consult with our allies before making major foreign policy decisions. And okay, so of course, China is at the center of all of this. In the current situation with steep competition between China and the United States, there's declining views of favorable views of China. So again, this is that 0 to 100 scale, and Americans give an average of 32 to China now, the lowest that we have ever seen in our surveys. This is also a bipartisan rating, and the Japan, and actually it's the lowest since 1978. Also, Americans, I think it's 81% say that China is more of a rival than a partner to the United States, also a high. Yeah, there you go, 72%. And you can see that big shift from March 2018 when more Americans said that China is a rival. They also think, it's also 72% say that China is an economic unfair player, and that is also the highest. So it's interesting because in the foreign policy establishment and the Beltway in DC, the foreign policy experts were quick to point out that, or to summarize, conclude that China is a critical threat to the United States, but it took the American public a bit of a longer time. Republicans were the first to view China as a threat. You can see in this line over here, the 54% in 2019 of Republicans viewed China as a threat. But now, by 2020, the attitude that China is a threat is for the first time, a majority, 55% say China is a threat to the United States, and especially high among Republicans. Actually, of all the threats we presented, including COVID, Republicans chose China as the top threat, where Democrats also big increase, 10 percentage points since over the past year, but they saw COVID as the #1 threat, followed by domestic political extremism, like violent white nationalist type extremism, and also problems of racial inequity in the United States. So and climate change is a big one for Democrats always. asked about, but I did want to say that it's easy to overstate. With these numbers, you can see that it would be easy to overstate Americans' negative views toward China. In fact, we just came out with a survey result today that showed that 67% of Americans say that China is trying to displace the United States as the leading world power. But when we asked, again, these are brand new out today, and I can send you all the report if anyone's interested. But when asked of a list of priorities for the United States in Asia, we found that people could list it's a top priority, it's an important top priority, but not a top priority, or it's not a priority. So this is just the top priority. You see that limiting China's expansion in Asia is much lower than items like working to ensure economic growth, 65%, strengthening democracy, 57%, even limiting the impact of climate change and denuclearizing North Korea. All of those are seen as higher priorities than limiting China's expansion in Asia. There are some differences across the political affiliations. For everybody, well, for Republicans, the economy comes first, but then denuclearizing and limiting China's expansion and strengthening democracy come around the same. And for Democrats, climate change is the number one thing. And in fact, limiting China's expansion in Asia is seen as the least top priority. And then, so from the Japanese side, also, China is seen as a threat, but North Korea is seen as much more of a threat than China. And Americans are pretty divided on, I don't think I'm gonna have time to go through these, but Americans are pretty divided on whether they should the United States should actively limit China's ability to influence the world through its power, or whether they should work in a friendly, cooperative way. It's 51 to 47, 51 saying we should actively limit it. But then we asked some specific questions about what policies exactly Americans would prefer. I'll just quickly say there is bipartisan support for sanctions on Chinese officials responsible for human rights abuses. Also, Pew survey found that Americans see human rights as the #1 reason Americans are unfavorable toward China. Negotiating arms control agreements, prohibiting US companies from selling sensitive high-tech products, working with China to limit climate change, and prohibiting Chinese technology companies in building communications networks in the United States. So all of those get bipartisan support. Where there is a difference between Republicans and Democrats, with Republicans more hawkish than Democrats, is on increasing tariffs on products imported from China. All through the Trump administration's Republicans supported the tariffs, and Democrats did not. Significantly reduced trade between the US and China. Republicans support it, Democrats do not. Restricting the exchange of scientific research and limiting the number of Chinese students. Republicans support it, Democrats do not. And then in the bigger picture, both Americans and the Japanese support finding a middle way to approach China. In the United States, this is a new question. In the past, we've only pitted friendly cooperation with limit the growth of China's power, and that was divided. 47 wanted to take friendly cooperation, 51 said limit power. This year, we asked an alternative to half the sample because I think this version is more realistic, because you usually don't go 100% one way or the other. And as we found out, 54% of Americans say it should be a mix of sort of carrots and sticks, or try to limit the power sometimes, but work for unfriendly cooperation on other issues. And Japan, similarly, and this is interesting given Nabe's description of Japan being a frontline state. The Japanese think that instead of prioritizing relations with the United States, or relations with China. Instead, a majority say we should not take a side and work on international cooperation or development. And then finally, just in terms of China's impact on the U.S. Japan relations, what we found over the last few years is that an increasing percentage of Americans say that the United States should strengthen its alliance in Japan so as to offset China's power. It went from 32% in 2008 to 43%. And the plurality, or almost just as many, now say we should just maintain the alliance with Japan, and only 1 in 10 in either year said we should downplay our alliance with Japan to improve relations with China. And in Japan, again, when we asked what should China-Japan relations look like in the context of U.S.-China tensions, this was a Genron question. See, a big chunk aren't sure what to do. But among the rest, more say that Japan and China should promote cooperation with each other while minimizing the tensions. Only 14% say Japan should automatically align with US actions, and 10% only 10% say that Japan and China should automatically align despite the US tensions. So that was a lot of information. And I'm sorry that I'm just so interested in this is one of those foreign policy issues that's been changing, and Americans seem to be paying attention. Basically, to summarize, that US opinion of Japan and the alliance has been consistently favorable. Japanese opinion of the United States has declined just in the past year, but hopefully will rebound. But many reasons why that could be. It'll be interesting to see if the United States can rebuild some of its credibility now that does it just take the change of a president and some of the statements that we saw on these high-level visits, or does more need to be done to rebuild our credibility? And then on the threat to China, Americans seem to want, just like Nabe was saying, see China as a critical country for us now, want to pull Japan and Korea even closer to strengthen the alliance. The Japanese, I think, might be a little uncomfortable in that role just based on the 2020 numbers. They don't want to be forced to take a side, and that's understandable. But it's clear from the data that the Japanese find the US alliance to be a very important one and have very close ties with the US. So it seems like a good starting point for building a common approach and a lot of reassurance on both sides.
Thank you, Dina. A lot of questions pop up, and I hope we'll have some time. But let me have Louis take us through kind of having seen, listened to Nabe, and then having seen your data, what his thoughts are from his experience.
Thank you. So first of all, let me just say, anytime you're in the third spot in one of these, you deeply are concerned as to whether anything you were going to say has been thrown off by the people in front of you. And I want to thank Nabe and Dina for really nice presentations that don't do that to me, that very much fit in with the conversation I came dimly prepared to have. I want to go back, and this plays out very closely in the data you just saw, which again is great because I don't have to feel like I'm trying to be argumentative. 2006, 2005, 2006, I think just before I would agree with Dina that the foreign policy establishment made a decision about China and maybe the rest of the country wasn't asked. But in 2006, Donald Rumsfeld wrote a white paper for DOD. This is prior to his being asked to depart. in which he declared in very stark terms that China was the rising military threat to the United States, and that he wanted to publish this white paper as a call for action. And he was very motivated. It was about defense dollars. It was about a lot of the things that you see. Interestingly, Biden's chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Secretary of Defense, Austin, saying. And in 2006, he tried to get this through the White House. And Condoleezza Rice was a state, and she threatened to resign if it was released. And this is within the Republican Party. So in 2004, 2005, 2006, if Dina and I and Nabe had been on this panel, we'd have to talk about the bipartisan debate about whether we should treat China as a frenemy, someone we work with. You all got frenemies. Let's not all pretend everyone on this call knows exactly what a frenemy is. You have someone you work with, or it's in your family, or it's in your relationships, in which your status with them is unclear. And sometimes it seems like everything's going great, and sometimes it seems like things are not. Now, the nice thing about frenemies, and the argument that Condoleezza Rice made in 2005, 2006, was as long as you don't declare your rivals, if you don't come out and state it, even if you think of them that way, you're leaving open the possibility that the relationship won't turn out badly, that you won't have to read a book like Graham Allison's Thucydides Trap and worry about whether war is going to break out through the management of the relationship. The downside to the frenemy approach, which was actually the dominant approach in both Democratic and Republican administrations for most of the early 20th century, was that it's very unclear as well. So when something happens like the Senkaku crisis, it's not clear how you signal to China what you want to signal, because you haven't established this formal understanding of the relationship. What I would argue, and again, in complete agreement with the two people in front of me, which is great, is that that's over. That you've just gone from a Trump administration that put China at the forefront of traditional threats, and frankly wasn't particularly interested in what I would call some of the untraditional threats, to the dismay of those of you who would put climate in front, immigration in front, etc. And you've just had a Biden administration that clearly sent the Secretary of State to Alaska to make it clear that this is a contested and rival-based relationship, that we'd love to work together, but we're not going to simply let things go in the name of transition. Given that these two presidents are dramatically different people who probably agree on virtually nothing, the fact that we've gone from a Republican and a Democrat and we've kept the general tone, similar, interestingly, to Bush to Obama on the war on terror, this means it's probably now consensus policy. The fact that the American public, as Dina just laid out fabulously, is following suit, both Republicans and Democrats moving in the same direction, whether they're moving at the same rate or moving for the same reasons, is not coincidental either, because it means there's very little political cost inside the United States to making that statement, to taking this posture. Now, here's the question that, of course, we have to ask if we're strategists. The nice thing about openly saying to someone, and if you've ever had to do this at work, or you've ever had someone who thought you were way better friends than you were, when you have that really awkward conversation when you say, and Thomas Weiss just did a piece in the Atlantic in which he called this, "We get real with China." We start to have real relationships, because now we're going to call them what we think they are, and they're going to get to talk to us that way, and this is actually going to be better. And he has a point if it works. And his best point is that now at least we can say to each other things like, yeah, we don't approve of that. And the other thing that it does is that once you establish the bounds of the relationship, you should be able to signal better. You should be able to send messages to each other in a very, for those of you who are academically oriented, Thomas Schelling-esque sort of way, in which we can have, or Graham Allison, if you read the Thucydides Trap, we can set the bounds of the relationship. It's very clear. The downside, of course, is it's very clear, but that everything you do is perceived by them as a potential adversarial decision, and everything you do can be perceived, everything they do is perceived by you. So Graham Allison's concern is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. With the United States, Japan, its allies, the Quad, I know you heard my colleague Sinjin Zhao on the Quad in a previous meeting in this group, so I won't go too far down the Quad route. But what now has to happen is you have to find a way to formulate an actual strategy now that you've made the decision that China is a premier threat. And again, I don't want to get into the debate about whether it should be higher than climate or not higher than climate, but if you've put China on the agenda at that level and you've said to the Chinese, we see you that way and we're openly, publicly going to talk about it, and we're going to rally public support behind it, you're making a different statement. And I think we're there now. You just watched it happen, I think, actually in the last few months. What does this mean then in terms of our relationships with allies, which of course is one of the key themes here? Let me give you an example, and I'm very interested in Professor Nabe's insight on this, because I don't have a lot, to be fully honest. It doesn't surprise me, for example, that in February, certain LDP politicians in China leaked into the Nikkei publication that was then reported in English and got big buzz in Washington and in my circles, that Japan might be willing to consider a Taiwan Relations Act that was similar to the American one, in which Japan would actually make a formal commitment to helping Taiwan be prepared to defend itself. Now, in the United States, this was huge. This was a big deal in certain circles. Again, if you want a nice analysis of this, Adam Liff of the Woodrow Wilson Center did one that you can find online. And what basically this was taken as is, okay, Japan is committed in the same way the United States is to this sort of deterrent relationship with China. Now, of course, as we just heard, this is actually the other way around. We are just figuring out how to come to the Japanese concern that this is a fundamental threat of national security in military and diplomatic terms, and isn't it nice of us to show up? But we've been known to do this before. We discovered our allies have concerns that we decide to share. But the important piece here is that this isn't new for Japan. The thing I think we don't quite follow in this conversation is that Japan's been very quietly been a very important supporter of Taiwan defense and political and economic growth for a very long time. Japan has been very quietly a key member of maintaining certain global trade orders that we decided not to participate in. Japan playing these roles isn't new, and in Liff's piece he explains, and I agree with him, that whether Japan actually signed such a thing, and he suspects, as I suspect, it was just a leak. But notice that it's a very clear signal. It's a signal that one of the things that could happen from all this Quad and 2+2 and increased interaction is that there are possible legal maneuvers that could be taken that would formalize Japanese commitments, that would formalize American commitments, that would arrange new potential relationships. Even if it doesn't happen, the signal is very clear to China. And so what I think you're going to see for the next 3 or 4 years in the Biden administration and then whoever follows the Biden administration is that we've made the decision to talk openly about China as a rival. We've ended the debate about how to talk about China. And now we have to figure out how to signal China. What's important, what's not important, what we're going to let go, what we're not. What we're going to say, in spite of our differences, we can work on. Climate being, I think, the most prevalent one, given how upset China was that we backed out of the Paris Climate Accords after they finally decided to participate. This actually was a real problem for the Chinese. They thought they'd done the right thing and signaled a certain cooperative intent. And then we turned around and backed out. They don't particularly want to have to achieve all the climate goals that they signed on for, and they don't actually think anybody's going to make them. But they liked being rewarded for the gesture. They were signaling good intent. They were not rewarded. So it's the signaling piece that the people in my line of work are going to spend a lot of time on. And I think you've seen the beginnings of this. I think, for example, it's not a coincidence, as both of the previous speakers laid out in better detail than I need to now, how much dialogue is going on, how many references are being made in all of the partner countries regarding China as a threat, a rival, the very strong language in the Japanese-American statement, not a coincidence. That Australia, after years of being the classic Chinese frenemy, white paper after white paper about how we rebalance our relationship with China, even though we want to sell them every rock we can get out of the ground, becomes this very awkward situation that, in fact, Australia got punished for political deviance from what China would like, and so their economic relationship didn't hold up. So Australia suddenly is much more enthused about calling China a rival, a threat, and being part of some sort of cooperative structure. And for those of you who know anything about India, the rise of a nationalist leader in India, in Modi, whatever you may think of his overall political agenda, was clearly going to lead to an opportunity for the United States to capitalize on that natural rivalry between India and China. So the opportunity emerges, as Dina laid out brilliantly, the political costs have gone down to taking risks in terms of openly confronting China policy. In fact, I think Biden administration and the Trump administration and the Japanese administration are all counting on there being diplomatic and political benefits to being much more open about this conflict without any undue risk. But this only works if, in fact, you can figure out the balance. And I want to make sure we leave time for questions. So I'm not going to walk through all the parts of this because we can bring it back in Q&A if that's what you're interested in. But let me propose to you that there is an interesting set of questions that have to be answered as we go forward. And we can take it from there. I would also just say, I don't think it's a coincidence that the national security advisors of South Korea, Japan, and the United States are meeting in Annapolis on Friday. And very much to Nabe's point, their agenda never mentions the word China, because as he pointed out very well, the South Koreans are not ready to have that conversation. And the Japanese body politic, as the polling data shows, may not be ready to have that conversation. But let me assure you that somewhere after they do this agenda, which I'll read real quick, they're going to talk a lot about China. The fact that they're not prepared to say that publicly is a different matter. But I would just say that in support of the polling data, the fact that we're all hearing a lot more public talk, news conferences, public statements, diplomatic statements, presentations, not just for the foreign policy establishment, whatever that turns out to be, or the national security establishment, but for the public consumption is not a coincidence and is very much supported by this link between international need and public opinion. The agenda, just for the record, between these 2+2+2s is maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, and combating climate change. So a very moderate, multilateralist, democratic president kind of agenda, reflecting the importance we place on broadening and deepening our cooperation on key issues and advancing our shared prosperity across a free and open Indo-Pacific. And you may read free and open Indo-Pacific as one that China doesn't run. And so this is clear. Here are the three questions. And again, I just want to make sure I don't occupy all the time and we all send you off without getting a chance to answer your question. Question number one, can you devise a deterrence strategy that isn't based on containment? Because while there's a lot of conversation in the United States, there's conversation in Japan, there's conversation in a lot of the economic powers involved, about decoupling the global economy and how the COVID pandemic has led people to concern themselves about dependence on Chinese supply chains and dependence on Chinese manufacturing, worries about Chinese technology, which showed up in both Nabe and Dina's presentations, I think very accurately. China is the first or second largest economy in the world. The idea that this is the equivalent of the Soviet Union, which could barely come out of its economic defensive crouch to maintain an empire in Eastern Europe, is not exactly a good analogy. So can you deter a China that is not going to retreat into a defensive shell or try to maintain a territorial empire, but can in fact fund things like the Belt and Road Initiative and conceptually believes it can fund things like the Health Silk Road? This is an outward-looking country. Whether it's an overtly aggressive country, we can debate. It is an outward-looking one that has the resources to back that up. So you're going to have to find a way to deter China from doing things you don't want to do without necessarily containing China, which is probably not possible. Second thing you better decide, and I really want to steal blatantly from Nabe on this. If Japan's a frontline state, and I completely agree with him that it is, I liked everything he said about this and would just nod at him and go, yes, what he said, then Taiwan is West Berlin. Do you want to base your deterrence of China on the defense of Taiwan? There's a really good Council on Foreign Relations report by Blackburn and Zellicoe that just came out. There's a nice War on the Rocks piece if you're interested in a shorter version than their report on their approach. And they make a really important point that I think every defense planner I know agrees with. Like West Berlin, the United States is not going to defend Taiwan in advance. Unless the Chinese are foolish enough to turn like every rocket engine on for a test 2 days before they attack, we're not going to get there in time. We're not going to prevent a Chinese invasion of a small island off Taiwan, a blockade from going in place, and rocket strikes from happening. This isn't going to happen. This wasn't true of West Berlin either. We weren't going to defend West Berlin if the East Germans decided to snatch it, or the Russians gave them permission to snatch it. We were going to deter this from happening because we believed, we had convinced the Chinese it was important enough to us that we would respond. So Blackburn and Zelikow argue the key is to get the allies, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, potentially Australia, potentially India, on board with a strategy in which, if the Taiwanese will give us the time, we will see that as an expansion of the war. And thus, because all our body politics are committed, we will then defend Taiwan as an extension of a larger principle. For this to happen, as Dina knows better than I do, public opinion has to move in a certain direction. The longer the valiant Taiwanese are holding out against the terribly authoritarian, evil Chinese, PRC, the better it looks, the easier this argument is to make. It won't be made by Congress. It probably won't be made by the Japanese parliament. It'll be made by military leaders and political leaders who see this as an advantageous way to do this. It is not clear, however, to defense planners in the United States or Japan or Taiwan, if I'm honest, that I know, that this is in fact a viable strategy, that Taiwan is the thing that should be defended at all costs. Because if it works, then like West Berlin, it is a fabulously powerful symbol of how much the Americans appreciate certain principles and certain allies. And if it doesn't work and you can't defend Taiwan, all bets are off, because no one should believe you that you're coming to their rescue before. I don't know, Dr. Watanabe knows more about this than I do, but I heard a story from the State Department contact I have every reason to believe. The first country to call when we refused to defend the Crimea from Russian little green men and various other tactics, according to my friend, the first person to call the State Department was the Japanese foreign minister, whose comment was, "You won't take on the Russians. We're supposed to believe you will take on the Chinese." Now, I suspect this was an opening salvo to get more military assurances, to get slightly other things. I assume this was a diplomatic ploy. But I don't think that's irrelevant to this conversation about the United States building better alliances in Asia, because I'm not sure everyone believes the United States is all in, because the United States has not yet articulated a strategy that makes that clear. I can't get an answer for you from if I wandered the DOD and ask you, should we defend Taiwan at all costs? It's not clear. The inverse of that is that I don't think we are all completely convinced in the United States that everybody else is in. As Nabe very clearly pointed out, the South Koreans don't like to talk about China. The Philippines are all over the place regarding China. The Japanese have been the most consistent, but as he very articulately lays out, and I don't even have to go through it now, public opinion is not in the same place in Japan that I think certainly the last two prime ministers have been. And this is a problem in a country, let's face it, for all kinds of good reasons and admirable reasons, has a history of sort of latent pacifism. We can say the Shinkaku crisis may have shaken Japan out of that, but from an American standpoint, are the Japanese all in? It's an important question. Again, to be fair, I opened with the Japanese asking, are you all in? We haven't resolved that yet. Is Australia all in? Probably, because it's already largely integrated into American operations. If they're willing to go to Australia or Afghanistan, they're probably willing to follow us to Taiwan. But it's not clear India is all in, or what even India being in means. Short version of this, to wrap it up so you can have time. We have made a decision, which I think both of my previous speakers have laid out really, really well, that we're going to treat China as a strategic rival. China is going to be the near peer competitor. We're not going to waffle about that. The Secretary of State's not going to cancel that report. That's now public knowledge, and it's having effects on public opinion in Japan, in the United States, in Australia, in India, in the Philippines. We haven't figured out the mechanics. We are in 1952. I don't like the Cold War analogy for all kinds of reasons. Some of you have suffered through my presentation on why the Cold War analogy doesn't work for China. But the moral of the story is we're in a very early stage. A president that's committed to it, evidence that he has partners willing to work with him. I think the partners were actually ahead of the president of the United States in this case. But we haven't figured out how to signal China, and we haven't figured out how to signal and rally our allies so that we can all share the same message. That's what has to happen next. Thanks, Floyd. I'll leave the rest of the time if we've got any left.
Thank you, Lou. That was great. I think I have so many questions myself, and but I think I'd first let Nabe, and let me respond to anything you want to respond to, but let me specifically kind of cite sort of something Dina said and Lou referred to, and that is that there's a general feeling among elites in Japan that Republicans are better than Democrats, and that Trump, maybe even continuing Trump, might have been better, although I don't know it given the sort of his behavior in the last year or so. But the public, from Dina's data, is clearly liked Obama and didn't like Trump very much. And that kind of dovetails a bit into Lewis's thought of, are they all in, or is there kind of a disconnect between the foreign policy establishment, the party leadership, and the public? If so, are they going to move along? Will there be kind of a convergence on that? What's your there are so many great points have been made here, but a few thoughts, Nabe.
Oh, right. Thank you. Thank you very much for the good question and the very interesting to the presentation on especially the Japanese public opinion and elite perception difference. That's very interesting, and you know, that's always, especially the I think it's which one I don't know, either the Lou or Dina mentioned the Japan's pacifism, deep-rooted pacifism is very strong and very difficult. Like you know, of course, the negative feeling against China doesn't equally mean Japan is ready to making a military building up, this kind of things. And also the Japanese people, not only Japanese, many U.S. allied partner has the conflicting the traditional security dilemma. That's the worry of the entrapment versus worry of abandonment. So I think you know, for Senkaku, Japan really needed the U.S. support, and so glad to hear U.S. leaders say that the Senkaku is under the Japanese administrative control and the target of a U.S.-Japan alliance. Yes, but, you know, at the same time, if U.S. is try to defend Taiwan from China, Japan, how much Japan can help? I think. Of course, more worry is clearly if U.S. started some military engagement against China, U.S. military in Japanese territory is under target of the Chinese military, and that means clearly Japan is a target of Chinese military action. So some people are very worried about. Some people hesitate to make sense, hesitate to declare the alliance action. And some people, the other people is clearly said, because of this, Japan really needed to determine to working with the United States. I think that's majority. And that's the majority of government officials. But you know, also public opinion is sometimes very depending on how they are asked. And but support to the US alliance is very strong, and the worry about Chinese behavior is very strong. So that's always, but I'm not so worried about it in case Japan is try to decide if taking side either China and the United States. The answer is very clear. But you know, and also some kind of a discrepancy for the Japanese perception is a very good target for the influence operation by China or other countries, even Russia. Because strength over U.S. Against China or Russia, either U.S. networking with allied partner, allies and partners. So, but trouble is now in the world, this information is really important. I think it's a very interesting studies in the U.S. I think this information doesn't have to be always fake news, but including fake news. I think such kind of this information, the flow is studied by the U.S. institution. And sometimes the Japanese language is a big chunk of such this information. And not majority, but sometimes I came across to the Japanese people who still believe Trump won. And the victory of Biden was somehow the cheated by the one. That's clearly the many Americans still believe this. But such kind of disinformation is somehow shared in Japan. I don't know who did, but if some country who really wanted to divide Japan and the U.S., it's worth trying to send this kind of information. And remember the Crimea annexation by the Russia. That was called hybrid warfare. That's combination of the information warfare and gray zone operation. I think that could be more possible in the case of either Taiwan or Senkaku. I think we should be very careful to the perception of American and perception of the Japanese. So the question and the answer to the Freud question, perception gap, yes, exists among Japanese elite and the Japanese people, and that could be the target of influential operation. But still, clearly, in case of defending Japan or serious situation surrounding Japan, I'm sure the Japanese, the majority really wanted to take alliance because that's most safeguard and most reliable the tools to defend their own territory.
Thank you, Nabe. And I think we're, without those comments, we're out of time. But let me say that I think that one of the most important statements that Lou said is that it's 1952. In other words, it really is sort of the beginning of this dialogue. I am certainly going to recommend to the, and many of them are on the Zoom right now, the Consul-General and others who sponsor this program, that we need to do this again. This was excellent. Dina, I will make your data available to people that want to take a look at it. And we appreciate all three of you for taking the time. Louis, I'm hoping you're going to go back to Annapolis because you've got so many great questions. I want you to be in that discussion when it takes place. I would say this, it's an exciting moment to be in your line of business because I do think it is 1952. I see Atchison getting together with who was it, Gormakov, and they're going to have a serious or Molotov, was it Molotov? They're going to have a serious conversation about what this things look like over the next few years, and we're off to a fast start. Let me conclude by just thanking our sponsors one more time. Obviously, the Corbell School, the Consul-General, our Crossley Center, our speakers. It's now I guess 9:30 in Tokyo, and Dina's in Chicago, so it's even later there. It's like 7:30, whereas we're hanging in here, or is it 6:30? We're hanging in here in Denver, and I want to thank everyone, obviously, for joining us. This program, along with all of our other three programs, we will come up with notes related to it. We will get those posted, and then the video will be posted. And maybe we can think about an article or two that comes out of it, because I do think this was an especially rich conversation, and I thank our panelists for making it so rich. And everyone, thank you, and good night. Appreciate your being here.